You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Look like a little country, some rock and roll and blues. 'Cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Laura Pleasance. Now, you probably know Laura Pleasance by her role as guitarist and vocalist on Kylessa, but we're going to be talking about the discussion.
Cool.
Welcome.
Thank you.
The discussion is a very different band than Kylessa.
Indeed.
I mean, like night and day. Why the change?
I've been doing Kylessa for 15 years. A little longer than 15 years, and Kylessa actually changed a lot in its inception, in its career. We have 7 studio albums, and the first album sounds quite different than the last album. There's a good bit of growth in between those records, but it was always sort of settled in the metal genre, various subgenres, but it always was heavy and distorted and downtuned. Even though it added a lot of psychedelic elements and indie rock or punk elements, classic rock elements even, it still had that metallic edge and some metal riffs. There's always a chock full of riffs. I just simply wanted to do something different. I still like metal and listen to it, maybe not as much as I did when I was 22. I'm a music lover, and I wanted to explore a different side to my music personality. So I'm just getting my feet wet with that EP.
And the EP we're talking about is the European Tour EP 2017.
Yes.
For those who aren't familiar with you, why don't we talk about your musical journey to this point?
Okay. Well, I started playing guitar when I was 16. Begged and begged for a guitar, worked all summer to get one. My mom met me halfway. I paid for half, she paid the other. And she got me some lessons, and then I was on my way. I wasn't really that interested at the time in learning to be the next Steve Vai. I wanted to learn Black Sabbath songs. I was like, tell me what this power chord is. How can I play Iron Man? So Iron Man was the first song I ever learned how to play, which is a good beginning. It's a good, because it's like dun, 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 dun. So it's like pretty easy. But I took a few lessons, and I was really into Sabbath at the time. And then also into the popular bands at the time would have been like the Seattle grunge scene. So I was really into Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, even though those bands kind of came when I was 14, but didn't get a guitar till I was 16, so I was still listening to a lot of that stuff. And then I discovered Fugazi around that same time and punk rock. So I was listening to Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and all the classic rock stuff, but also discovering Fugazi and Black Flag and Minor Threat. Danzig was really popular at the time, and he had, of course, the punk band Misfits, which I loved, and then the harder rock, harder edge band Danzig. So I was just gobbling up anything I could, and continued to do so when I went to college. And I came to college, or SCAD brought me to Savannah. During that period, I was like just kind of becoming a decent guitar player. Hadn't really played with many people yet. I went to a small school in Virginia, and everyone thought I was from another planet. So I didn't have much luck finding people to play with. But I came down here, and I started really getting into punk rock. Just I wanted to play punk music. I eventually found some guys to play with. The first band I was in was called The Flies, and we recorded a bit of a demo. We did a 4-track demo and then kind of a super quick studio recording at Elevated Basement, which was brand new at the time. And that was like garage surf stuff. I was really obsessed with Devo and the Cramps. So it was like really kind of garagey, surfy, kind of punk kind of thing. And that didn't last that long because everyone in the group was older than me, and most of them finished college and moved away. So that kind of ended. And then I was going to school and pretty serious about my studies. And then I started a punk group called the Mugshots, and it was more hardcore punk. And it's funny, Igor is still in town, and Igor played guitar and sang, and I played guitar as well, and just did like backup vocals. But Igor plays the
steel guitar now.
Yeah. So do you know Igor?
Yeah.
So I've known Igor forever. So we had this punk band for a while. We did it for a couple of years, and then I wanted to do something more serious. And so I kind of quit that. School was like my senior year, so I was pretty busy with school. And then there was this local band in town called Damned, and it was really heavy, and it wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I always enjoyed them live. Two of them were good friends of mine, Philip and Brian. And they were a good bit older than me and had already had an established band and were touring and had a couple of records out. And I said, well, Philip, if you ever want to start a band, let's do it. Because I was just looking for someone who was dedicated, and I was less concerned with musical direction because I was open to just do whatever, as long as it was interesting. So fast forward to the year 2000, Brian and Phil told me, hey, we're going to dissolve this band, Damned, and start something new. Do you want to be a part of it? And I said, absolutely. So then Kylessa was born. It kind of started in the footsteps of Damned, which was down-tuned, heavy, sludgy stuff. And I just kind of fell into that. Philip was my creative partner for many, many years. He and I were the longest running members of Kylessa. It was basically our baby. Through Philip and Brian, I started listening to a lot of underground, really heavy stuff, and I enjoyed it. I liked it. And then I brought some of my influences to the table, and we were off to the races.
Now, earlier you described Kylessa as changing quite a bit. As the personnel changed in the band?
A lot.
From early to late?
Yes, we had a revolving door, it seems, for a while. Brian, our original bass player, actually passed away from epilepsy when we were recording our first record. After we recorded that first record, we didn't know if we were going to continue, but we decided that we wanted to, and we found Corey Barhorst, who now plays with Black Tusk and Niche. But he had just moved to town, and he was up to play with us. So it was me, Philip, Corey, and Christian for 3 or 4 years. And then Christian quit. Then we got a new drummer, and that was like 2004, 2005. That guy lasted 1 year. That was a disaster. And we did one record with him. And then in 2006... we were trying out drummers. We decided to put like a post up online. And we got this guy, Jeff, from Detroit. And he came down. He was great. But in the interim, our friend Carl McGinley from the band Unpersons was playing with us locally. But he was in school and couldn't commit to doing any kind of touring because he wanted to finish school. But as we were getting this guy Jeff into town, Carl said, okay, well, actually, I want to do this full time. So then we kind of decided to have the 2 drummers. So then we got them both together, and it sounded great. So we rolled with that. Jeff lasted 1 year, And then we got a series of other drummers, and then Corey quit, and then we got another bass player, and it's kind of the revolving door. Carl stayed with us, though, this whole time, since '06. So we kind of had a revolving door of other drummers and other bass players. Philip and I always wrote the songs, so we felt that as long as we were there, it was the band, because we were the songwriters. But stylistically, we went from being really sludgy, crusty punk metal to incorporating a lot of psychedelia and more indie rock stuff into our sound as time went on. Some of the songs would be, if you were to just pull those songs out by themselves, there's nothing metal about them. You wouldn't think a metal band wrote those songs. But in the context of an album, we are still considered like a heavy band. But there were a lot of songs that were more rock-based. Our tone was always more rock, with a warm-sounding vintage kit and warmer guitar tones, Les Pauls. But we ran the gamut as far as styles. I mean, you could pick out a lot of songs from our repertoire, and if you were to put all the softer songs or the more psychedelic songs together and put them on a record, it wouldn't be filed in the metal section, for sure.
And so how would you characterize the discussion?
Well, for me, it's a natural step away from what I was doing. For me, it makes sense because I know everything that I wrote for Kylessa, but to everyone else, we were just a band. No one's like, okay, well, Laura wrote this and so-and-so wrote that. And I explore more of the psychedelic side, and I feel like there's one song that's kind of a nod to some of the older Kylessa stuff, just a little bit of a nod, and then there are a couple of songs that are way different, and then a song that's like kind of bridging the gap a bit. But it's definitely more melodic and pop based, even though it's not pop, but in more psychedelic, mellow, much mellower.
Tonight we have Laura Pleasance in the studio. Here it seems to be really a much more personal statement. And it depends upon the particular song, yes, but it's sort of like a statement of loss, a statement of rediscovery, perhaps, as you go through some of the songs. My favorite, Cuts Like a Knife, that has an edge to it, pun intended in this case, but it's got a sensitivity, sort of like a statement of loss. What was the origin of that song?
Well, I think you're pretty intuitive with your comments there. This release for me was indeed very personal and a statement and a rediscovery of this is all me, and I'm putting it on the table. I did all the bass parts, I did all the synth parts, I did all the guitar parts, and then all the vocals. So it was a lot more to have to deal with than just guitar or shared vocal duties. So it was all me. With that song in particular, it started off with the bass line, and I had just programmed some simple drums in GarageBand, and it started out with really bass and keyboards, which then I later ditched the keyboards. But I wanted to do, I'm really, really influenced by the whole krautrock movement of like the early 70s. That's like early German experimental rock. And a lot of it is really repetitive, and it's kind of trancey and repetitive, and it's like pre-electronic rock, and it's experimental, and I'm really into it. So I kind of laid out a template to play something very repetitive. That's where the bass line kind of came in.
The rhythmic bass line is just so mesmerizing. You get into it, and that becomes part of you as you're listening to the song.
That was the idea. Thank you. Then it really grew. I had everything kind of laid out, and then I jammed with the drummer. I just jammed it out on bass before I decided on the final structure. And once that was determined, then I went back with guitar. But I knew that if we could get the vibe with just the bass and drums, then I was in the right direction. And it had a vibe to me, a feeling, especially when I started messing around with the guitar melodies. And it is about loss. I lost a very good friend of mine to heroin addiction a couple years ago. And so it's loosely based on that.
Is it them speaking to you?
I am the drug speaking.
Oh, you're
to
the drug
person.
speaking.
Yeah.
Because I'm a liar and I'll eat your soul.
Mm-hmm. So it's just it's me taking on that role of a very powerful opiate.
Yeah, over and over, and I'll take control.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what the reference is.
And the knife illusion. Why particularly the knife illusion?
A knife can be so violent. I didn't want to say needle. I didn't want to be caught up in a bunch of cliches. A knife, people commit suicide by cutting themselves all the time. So it's like a little bit like that, but it's also I want to be not so direct, but a little abstract. And also when someone's like sharp like a knife, it's mentally sharp. So that kind of plays into that too. Thinking you're mentally sharp, but you're just under the control of something else.
So thinking you're on top of it, thinking you're in control, when indeed it's the drug that's in control.
Mm-hmm. And I never had an addiction problem with this drug, so I can only speak from not direct experience, but the experience I've had enough friends who have been negatively affected. And it never ends well.
Now, this one started with a bass line. It started with that mesmerizing, as you described, 70s German rock and roll beat.
Just and
the
very
repetitive
and
nature.
groovy, and just kind of you nod your head along. It's like at a pretty mid-pace tempo, not really fast. It's just kind of grooves. I love writing that kind of stuff, just stuff that just grooves, where you can just kind of nod your head to it.
It seemed like the first song on the EP, A Gesture Other Side, came about the same way, because that started like a drone, rolling sound that just envelops you. Did that come from the same origin? The music came first?
The music for me generally comes first. The intro in that became much longer than it was originally. I mean, I wanted to start out with a kind of a instrumental soundscape to set the mood for the live show and also for the record, because I started out with playing that live with samples kind of coming onto the stage. But that I had worked out on guitar first, and it's more guitar based. And some things changed here and there. But I had originally written it faster, and then I slowed it down. And then I recorded it and then decided, well, the second part needs to be faster. So I played it live faster. I think that song kind of was like a nod for the old Kylessa fans, because it does have what I would call a riff in it, whereas I purposely was not going to write any riffs for this project, not because I don't love riffs. I just wanted to do something different, and for my love of like other kinds of music that's like less Sabbath worship. I feel like that kind of music is just so overplayed.
You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
If you enjoy our programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. As an individual, you can give any amount, become a basic station member, or become a serious fan of the station. To check out membership rates and to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Again, to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by support from the 2018 Savannah Music Festival, which runs from March 29 through April 14th, 2018, presenting an all-day festival finale at Trustees Garden on April 14th with Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit, Tedeschi Trucks Band, Gillian Welch, Mark Broussard, Brent Cobb, Velvet Caravan with Jessica Ann Best, and more. Information at savannahmusicfestival.org.
You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Laura Pleasance in the studio. It's very interesting the way the album is constructed, because you start with the Gesture the Other Side, which is that long form. It's not devoid of riffs, but it's not riff driven. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing is true pretty much with Cuts Like a Knife. Mm-hmm. That's one of the longer.
It's the longest track.
Yeah, those two are the longer tracks. And again, I wouldn't say it's guitar driven, but there's some really interesting guitar work also in Cuts Like a Knife as well.
Yes, I mean, I think that's because I love guitar. So I have to do something that has guitar in it. I couldn't just be in a synth band. There's got to be guitar, because I just love it. I love it too much. You know, I have a million effects pedals, and I love playing with tone and what you can do with different pedals and different sounds and what you can make the guitar sound like. All that's important. I'm a guitar player, so there's gonna be guitar bits. It's gonna be a guitar record, even if it's not riff driven. It's gonna have guitar, and it's not just gonna be strumming C to E, C to E. Even though I did do that more on this, especially with a Gesture Other Side. It's just because it just starts off with like me kind of singing, playing a simple chord progression, which I hadn't really explored too much of that before.
It's a very simple lyric.
Very simple. Yeah. It came from a dream. I have pretty vivid dreams. I dreamed I was above the atmosphere, but it was still within the atmosphere, and it was still earth or earthly, but everything was kind of flowy and white, and but there were like weird cobwebs and things all over the trees, but I was kind of floating above them. And then I kind of went into this house, and it was really open. There wasn't much furniture. And then I was like looking for someone, and then I couldn't find them, and I kind of left, and I was like kind of above the trees. So that's kind of how it started. And then it just kind of, I explored that a little further. I lost my mother a few years ago to a bad battle with cancer, and it was hard to deal with. And so every once in a while, I'll still have dreams that kind of remind me of that loss. Or if I'm like searching for a spirit on the other side. So it's pretty abstract, but at the same time, I pay a lot of attention to my dreams just because they're very vivid. I tried a few different structures out with that song. Not many. It's pretty close to the demo. My sweet GarageBand demo. I've always been about like peaks and valleys, when it comes to songwriting, especially if you're going to write a longer song. I did add a bridge for that lyric because I thought it would have an effect of breaking it up there, singing that kind of part, and then kind of going back into a heavier verse. I did think it would have effect to put that bridge there and then the vocal and then kind of come in heavy.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that because you are a guitar player, there are going to be some guitar licks in the songs. That's not what dominates it.
Right.
However, I have to say, Surf Jesus did have some really good guitar licks.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Interesting lyric too, but the thing that really caught me was the guitar.
The fuzz guitar?
Yeah.
I like that fuzz. That's a cool fuzz. I'm just experimenting with stuff. Like, I love the Pixies, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to write a Pixies style song. It's got like a catchy bass line, it's got some clean guitar, it's got some cool fuzz guitar. I'm not saying it sounds like the Pixies, I don't think it does, but it's definitely more indie influenced than anything else. I remember writing that and I was like, this is good, I like it, but it needs something else. And now I put that fuzz guitar in there, which I think was successful.
Yeah, it really makes that song very unique in the whole EP.
Cool.
It seemed to be very, very different from everything else.
Now that song is 180 degrees different than what I've done in the past, which is why I was a little nervous to even do it because it was so different. And I wasn't so certain it was going to be successful. Not even successful from what people think, but successful in what I think. You know, am I going to like this? But I do like it. So in that sense, I think it was successful.
And what was the origin of that? The origin was you wanted to write something like the Pixies?
No, it didn't even come out like that. I was listening to a lot of Jesus and Mary Chain, and their stuff is so simple. And I was thinking, less is more, less is more, less is more. I mean, so it started out with a couple of chords on guitar, just strumming very simply to see if I can come up with a good vocal pattern. And then I put the guitar down and I came up with the bass. I was like, okay, we'll let the bass carry the pop element. And so once I got that down, then I decided, well, I don't really have to play rhythm on guitar necessarily. If the bass is carrying the rhythm, I can mess around with melodies that are, with a delay pedal, basically. I worked a long time on that song. It had a bazillion different structures before I settled on the one I did. It had a lot of different parts. It went through many different phases, I guess, before it ended up the way it is on the CD, which I guess is the disadvantage or advantage of not playing with a drummer while you're writing, because I'm just writing to a click, to like these crappy drum beats that GarageBand has. It started out where I wanted to write something really simple, basically, that had a mood, and I just added on top of it.
And where did the lyric come from?
Those lyrics just kind of came. Sometimes I'll write in prose, just write, and if I have a phrasing or melody in my head, I'll kind of go through a notebook that I have written down a bunch of lyrics, and if it fits that phrasing or melody, I'll use it. And then it kind of came into this abstract storyline. The title has nothing to do with the lyrics.
Oh, yeah, there's no question about that. And how did you come up with the title?
It was a working title, because originally it was a lot surfier. There was a lot of surf guitar, and I cut all that out. And the Jesus was the nod to Jesus and Mary Jane. And then I was like, I kind of like the way it sounds. I'm going to keep it.
There are sort of elements in each song that almost seem confessional. In this one, the line that just jumped out at me that seems somewhat confessional, and I'm just wondering if it is, and that's, well, you know me by now. You know I'll find the darkest place around?
That's personal, but it is a bit confessional. Definitely. I guess I'm telling my really close friends know that, and then jokingly I'm telling, hey, Kylessa fans, you know me. You know I'll find the darkness. That's kind of like a nod for that. I know I can find the dark place, as does my family. But I guess most people don't know. But I guess now you know.
The darkest place around.
Mm-hmm.
Not just a dark place, but the darkest
The darkest place. I will say, I will interject, I really like to play with light and dark themes, motifs. I've done it forever with Kylessa. I continue to do it with the discussion because the song itself is kind of poppy and light, but I'm not singing about dancing in a field of flowers. So there's that, that bit of juxtaposition that I like to toy with.
See you around.
You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Laura Pleasance in the studio. Yeah, light and dark, nature and self seem to come out of a lot of the songs. Just throw another one out, and that's Like Rain, where the dark shadows block the way, but then wind and water bring life into our lives, and every drop is reflecting of new life. That's in that larger sense of nature and self, but it really makes you look at rain in a new way when every drop reflects a new life. Let's contrast that to finding the darkest place around. It's like night and day. It's so dramatically different. What was the origin of this song in terms of things are rough, but it seems like there's always then this joy, there's this new life, there's this effervescence springing forward from that song?
That one doesn't necessarily have a linear meaning. I'd like to have a lot of ambiguity. Sometimes I'll write songs and they have many different stories in one song, and the audience may never know what those stories are, but to me it makes sense, and it can be described in a manner where people can also relate to it and think about what it may mean to them. And with water and rain, it is life, quite literally. But it's also, when you think of a rainy, dreary day, it's raining, it's dark, all of these kind of cliches you think about in terms of rain. I guess I was just kind of going through, there's just been so much death the past 3 years of my life. It's like, I hate to be so depressing. Victoria Scalisi, she was a big music power in town. She sang for Damned, and she was a bit older than everyone else, but just a solid staple in the music community. Even though she wasn't as active, but then she kind of became active again a few years ago and had some cool local stuff happening. Was always kind of active, always would come out to shows. Well, she passed away quite suddenly a few months ago from cancer at 53 years old. The music of that had already been written, but I was just thinking about it and thinking about her and thinking about the darkness and the clouds and the doom that rain can bring, but also the life and the life cycle and the brightness.
That I
Now, in organizing the EP, how did you structure it in your mind with the different songs in the different order?
It seemed like this was the only way it was going to work. Flow-wise, like, we were talking about mixtapes. I've recorded so many records. I really understand flow. And I always think about an A-side and a B-side. And granted, this is only a handful of songs, so it's not enough material to be an album. But, order was very important. I think the first two songs go very well back to back.
Adjust Your Other Side sort of leaves you wanting something else. And Like Rain seems to be maybe that resolution.
Because it just kicks in right away with that fast bass line. And it's just more up-tempo. Picks you up a bit. Also, I had gotten a band together and we were rehearsing for this tour. And these were the order we were playing them in. Granted, we played more songs than just those because we were playing a full hour set. So there's other songs in between these, but these are the order that we were playing them in, and I thought it made the most sense. Cuts Like a Knife to me is an absolute closer. The way it ends, it's so definitive, and there's a climax and the whole thing, and it's longer. And where I also think that Adjust Your Other Side is an obvious opener. I mean, some people will argue, well, you want to open with something that hits, something that's like strong, not so mellow. But
you hear that drone.
But you hear
Start
the drone,
right off the front.
and it's a mood.
And it's a mood. It sets the mood for the whole album, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the shorter ones. I mean, maybe you could switch Surf Jesus and Before We're Gone, and it would still work. But I just thought this flow made the most sense. This order made the most sense. Just by your ear, just listening. I tried a couple of other orders, and I like this one the best.
Are we going to be hearing some of this discussion around town?
If I can find a drummer. Because Richie moved. Yeah, because Derek is into playing with me, so we just need to find a drummer. Ideally I would have a keyboard player. So if you play keyboards, call me.
So we've been with Laura Pleasance tonight, and I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, it ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, 1, 2.